Hey, it's Mr. Mitchell with another 7th grade science video. Here are the questions. Go ahead and write them down. Today we're going to talk about biogeography. Bio means life, geo means world, and graphy means description of. So literally the description of life in the world is biogeography. It involves the study of where organisms live and why they live there. And it's also concerned with how species are distributed. For example, here in Australia, you have all these koala bears and kangaroos and duck-billed platypus that you just don't see anywhere else. And why is that the case? And why do you have armadillos that at one point were not here in the southeastern United States, but now they are here in the southeastern United States? They have come from somewhere else. And this is not just involved with animals. This is involved with all organisms, which would include plants as well. One factor that has affected how species are distributed is the continental drift, the motion of the continents. You may remember from last year that the continents are moving at about an inch or two per year. And many scientists think, or it's kind of common knowledge amongst scientists now, that all the continents were at one time one supercontinent, that they were all together. So if they were all together, you would think that all the animals on that supercontinent would have spread out evenly, but that's not what scientists are thinking. They're suspecting that Antarctica, which is not down here, but I'll draw a smaller Antarctica, that Antarctica was actually connected to Australia at first, and they were two of the first continents to break away from the other continents. So as a result, any animals that got their origins after the breakup of Australia and Antarctica would only be in these areas. Now, Antarctica, you have extreme cold, and you have a place where most animals could not survive. So that's why scientists think the continent Australia is like it is. Looking at my notes here to see if there's anything I have left out. Well, that's pretty much got it there. Let's talk about dispersal. Dispersal is a term in our book. Dispersal is the movement of organisms from one place to another. Now that doesn't include animals, of course. This includes plants, and it could be caused by several different ways. One way is wind and water. Now that's going to apply more toward plants than it will animals. I mean, you don't have many animals that are moved in the wind or moved in the water. But let's say you have a flower. You know that pollen of flowers' pollen is transported by bees. I'm a pretty bad drawer of bees here. How's that for a bee? Wow, that's pretty bad. But anyway, the pollen of the flower is transported by bees and other flying animals to other places. And that's not just the only example of that. You have lots of examples of where small organisms like flowers, even tiny spiders, are transported elsewhere. I was looking up a little bit of information on the internet and found out that this is also commonly done through animal poop. Now let me tell you how that happens. Whenever animals eat some kind of fruit, what's digested is the sweet, juicy part, but there are seeds and there are stones that are inside the fruit, and sometimes the seeds and the pits and the stones that are digested end up coming out in poop. So if you have a bird that has eaten something up here in Canada, and then it flies down here, this is kind of an extreme example, flies all the way down to Mexico, and it hoops along the way, some of those seeds from the fruit it ate up here, maybe not bird, and yeah, some of the seeds from the fruit it ate up here could be distributed in other places, just depending on how long it took to digest it and how fast it was flying. And even if it's not that far, even if it's just a small area, then that's how those seeds are dispersed, and those could end up being other fruits. Another factor could be other living things. Well, we just kind of mentioned that, but we're going to talk a little bit more about humans now. Humans often will take plants and will take animals to different areas. And I think this kind of happens with the animals that some people try to have as pets, like alligators, or some kind of exotic uh, animal like a tarantula or something like that. Let's say there's a person who's down here in Florida and ends up, for whatever insane reason, catches an alligator, and they had the means of transporting it back to their home in Colorado. Now, I'm not sure of the legality of that, but it has happened before where people take an animal from somewhere that they kind of like and want to domesticate or keep as a pet, and they end up taking it to wherever they end up living. And humans do that. And that's one thing that humans have been known to do, and that disperses out animals just as well. Climate can also affect the dispersal of animals. Uh, I have a picture here of Australia. Australia here has deserts almost the entire middle of the continent. Almost the entire middle of the continent is desert. And what we have here is the dispersal of a kind of frog. I can't remember exactly what kind of frog it is, but you can see from the dates here that in 1940 the frog was in the darkest of red, which I believe is just this little area right here. And I'm using the wrong color, that's for sure. And just this little area right here is where the darkest of red is. Then by 1960 it had grown to an area like here, but notice it started spreading out along the coast by this year, 2013. It did not go this way because whenever you have these frogs which are hopping around on the coast area and somehow end up going west, they have a much better climate on the northern part of Australia than they do in the middle part. If frogs start hopping in the middle part, you'll have a lot of frogs dying. And I'm sure that's what happened. You had some frogs that hopped out toward here, found that the conditions were not very good, and they either died or ended up making their way back toward a more livable area. So one detriment to dispersal, or I guess you'd say a limitation to dispersal, is going to be the climate. We'll go back to this other page here. And there's a term for an animal or a plant which has been moved. It is exotic species. We'll go with green. An exotic species is an organism that is carried or moved from one place to another. By definition, that would be an exotic species. What can limit the dispersal? We've already kind of mentioned that climate is going to be one of them. Another is going to be like physical barriers, waters, mountains, and that's one reason why you still have the koala and the kangaroo here. They haven't dispersed out because, well, you have all this water here, and it's so much harder for an animal to get from one place to another. Whereas here in Europe and Asia, there's so much better of a chance that you'll have one animal that starts out in here and will end up somewhere in a completely different area. Competition is another barrier to the dispersal of organisms. Let's say you have some kind of bird that is over here in Europe, and that bird ends up over here in the northern Mongolia or southern Russia area, over in Asia. They suddenly have to compete for the food with other animals over here. And it's not like they're just given all the stuff they need to survive. they enter into the competition. They have to find their niche over here wherever they end up. Same thing with any animal that's taken from, say, Florida over here to some other area. Say this alligator that's taken over here gets out in the wild, it has to compete with the other animals out here for its food. And sometimes those animals are just not able to compete. Say you take a penguin from down here in Antarctica and end up bringing it to Georgia. I mean, where's the penguin going to find its food? I mean, it's just not going to be able to find the food as well as it did here in Antarctica. It's got to go out and compete for whatever it would eat, its fish and whatever, and it's going to have a hard time even finding those. So that limits the dispersal of organisms. If that were not the case, then you probably have all kinds of different animals in all kinds of different places. Sometimes those animals that are moved around or plants that are moved around just aren't going to survive when it competes for its food and for its, I guess you'd say, shelter as well. And we also mentioned climate. Sometimes condition in a new climate may not be helpful for the survival of the exotic species. Mentioned the example of a penguin going to Georgia. And penguins are meant to be in a colder environment. I don't know that the penguin could survive as well in the heat of Georgia. And one thing that you might not have realized or thought about, I mean, you have a lot of places where you have tall mountains. Last year you studied the Andes Mountains here in South America. The Andes Mountains are really big mountains, and I'll use just kind of a sample mountain here out in the Pacific Ocean. But anyway, you have different climates and different levels of the mountains. The top of the mountains, you're going to have snow. Underneath that, you're not going to have trees. You're going to have like little shrubs. Underneath that is when trees start happening, and you have different kind of trees in this level than you may have, say, in this level. And at the bottom, you may even have a completely different climate near the ocean. So if you have an animal or a plant species which is able to survive here, it's found its niche right up here in this shrubby section, then the odds of it dispersing downward and finding its niche down here are pretty slim if it's adapted to live up in this area here. So something like a mountain is really going to affect how animals are dispersed. Well, don't forget to go back and do the questions. I hope you've learned a little bit about biogeography.